Hello, I'm William Henry, sitting in for Whitley Strieber from Nashville. This is Dreamland. It's great to have you. Mark Pinkham is our guest. His book, Guardians of the Holy Grail, the Knights Templar, John the Baptist, and the Waters of Life, is one of the most complete and controversial books on the Grail I've read in a while. Today, we'll be discussing the hidden history of the Grail and the spiritual practices of the Knights Templar. The mysterious Templars are with us today, and in this hour, we'll find out what they're up to. Mark, welcome to Dreamland.
Thank you, William. It's a great pleasure to be on.
Yeah, it's been a while. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing good. Long time no see. I remember speaking with you in a conference in Switzerland some years ago, and that was certainly a great pleasure to hear you and meet you at that time.
Yeah, that weekend was a lot of fun. It was a Sitchin event, as I recall, and I remember when I arrived there, I got to the conference, and of course nobody was speaking English, and I saw this beautiful woman come walking through the door, and naturally my eye is, kind of cast in her direction, and suddenly I get caught looking at her by this big burly Italian guy dressed in black leather and everything, and the next thing I know, this guy is like walking towards me. And I'm like, oh, great, here we go. Just 40 minutes into Zurich, I'm already picking a fight. And the guy walks up and he goes, you know Professor Sitchkin? I'm like, Sitchkin? Yeah, Professor Sitchkin. I said, you mean Sitchin? He said, yeah, Professor Sitchkin. And so the next thing I know, we're becoming fast friends because we're both big friends of Zacharias. And turns out his name was Gaspari Melcher. He was a famous Italian painter, still alive, of course, and he had done a book called The Roswell Symbols, which was really interesting. You might have remembered talking with him then.
Mm-hmm. Right. Was that beautiful woman, by the way, the same woman I saw you walking out the door later on that night with?
No, we don't go there. Let's talk about your book, The Serpent of Wisdom. I remember that was your new book. It was out at that time, and then I had One Foot in Atlantis that had just come out, and then of course Whitley got a hold of that book soon after, and he really enjoyed it, thank God, and hence I'm here today, and so here we are. And since '97, you've gone on to grind out several really interesting books, and along with your wife, Andrea, you've founded the International Order of Gnostic Templars. It sounds like you've been really busy.
Yeah, I have. Spirit has a way of keeping my plate pretty well full these days, but there's been kind of a natural sort of progression of events, you might say. Everything that I've been doing in some way or another is connected to the ancient goddess tradition and its current revival on the planet today.
So when you went to the Sinclair clan with your idea to start a new Templar organization in America, you must have gotten quite a reaction. I want to hear that story, but first let me ask you about the Templars and reincarnation. In the introduction to Guardians of the Holy Grail, you talk about how important reincarnation is to many Templar enthusiasts and this idea of finishing the job. And it just seems like there's a lot of people out there with a Templar Jones they're trying to fix, that souls still have that same drive. So I'd like to start by asking you, Mark, and I'm not being confrontational in any way, I'm just wondering, do you believe you're a reincarnated Templar, or is this something you tapped into?
It's something I feel could be true. I think there's probably only one past incarnation I can say is definitely true for me, because I kind of woke up one day to being that same entity and fully remembered my past existence. But this particular past life or past lives as a Templar came to me up in the mountains of the Andes. And if you've ever been up there, you know that one of the common experiences is that you find yourself more open to kind of clairvoyant information. And this particular day I was walking in the mountains with a friend, and we both got at the same time that we had been Templars before in the past, and that we'd returned now to assist in the revival of the Templars. And right after that time, I put out on my mailing list what my intentions were to revive this order. And my question was to everybody, well, if you're interested, get back to me. And, I had a great response. But, what was really interesting is that about 90% of those that responded were women. And these are women that believe that they were Templars before in the past, and they have come back also to revive the Templars, but specifically the Gnostic aspect of the Templars, or that part of the Templars that was descended from the goddess tradition itself.
Very interesting. Mark, what about the job you mentioned that the Templars left incomplete? What is that job, and how will we know when it's finished?
Well, I think there was a few different goals that the Templars had. I think that they were the first to have as their goal the creation of a planetary society, a planetary civilization, and that goal has been passed down from them to the Freemasons, the Illuminati, to many of the secret societies in Europe that came after them. The particular goal that we are trying to complete within the Templars is the uniting of East and West forms of spiritual traditions. The Templars, of course, were indoctrinated into Catholicism. They were born and bred in France. But when they went into the Middle East, it's believed that they were trained by the Sufis, who at that time were synthesizing the spiritual traditions from all over the world. Every place that the Muslim empire had gone, they had brought back the teachings and the scrolls and the ancient wisdom and put them in their libraries. And so they had these synthetic traditions that they were creating that we believe that the Templars studied. But also we believe that the Templars were initiated into a Holy Grail lineage, or Johannite lineage, if you will. This is a lineage of masters, great masters that actually originated in the Far East. And it's that lineage that truly unites East and West forms of spirituality, because within that lineage was John the Baptist, was Jesus, was John the Apostle, and Mary Magdalene. And then from that point on, the lineage descended down a long line of Grand Masters until the time of the Templars. And right after the Templars were formed, Hugh de Payens, the first Templar Grand Master, was initiated into that lineage and became its Grand Master. And from that point on, this lineage was basically synonymous with the Templars. And we believe that the Templars took the lineage back into Europe, as well as their more Gnostic rites that they learned from the Sufis and learned through this lineage. And they started practicing these rites, and of course they were very misunderstood. Anything that wasn't Christian at that time was completely understood and and believed to be the work of the devil, of course. And so when they were found out, when King Philip IV of France infiltrated the order with 12 spies, and they were found out, then it wasn't long after that they were arrested and persecuted and burned at the stake.
And since then, people have been on a quest to recover the lost secret of the Templars, which in the book you describe as having connections with Gnostic teachings. You've mentioned John the Baptist. Tell us about the Gnostic Jesus, though, the Gnostic heretic, and why the revival of his teaching is so important today.
Well, we believe that Jesus was a successor to John the Baptist. John the Baptist was, for all intents and purposes, the father of Gnosticism in the West. John the Baptist is, according to the Mandeans, who are the only Gnostic sect still existing on the planet today, according to them, John the Baptist was not a Essene or even Jewish. He was actually Mandean. And he was descended from the Mandean civilization that actually were the ones that preserved that Holy Grail lineage. It passed down through their Grand Masters, who were known as the Nasserai Masters.
And we should mention that the Mandeans came from ancient Iraq, correct?
The Mandeans, actually, they say in their text they came from Sri Lanka originally.
Interesting.
And these are texts that Lady Drower and some anthropologists over the last 150 years have gone into Iraq and studied, and that's what they say. And in fact, I did an interview with one Mandaean woman who's in the States today, and she confirmed the Sri Lankan heritage, and she also said that many Mandaeans actually look Indian because of that.
You know, that's interesting because I've been doing some research here in Nashville. There's according to Nashville legend, we have a ceremonial center here at the base of our state capitol where vast numbers of bodies are interred. These bodies belong to an ancient stone grave race, as they're called, that Nashville legend says are the Mandan Indians. Now, state archaeologists don't like them because they're white-skinned, they're white-haired, they're Caucasian, and what are they doing in ancient Nashville around 400 A.D.? And so I jumped off a cliff one day and said, wait a minute, you know, that name Mandan is strikingly similar to Mandaean. I wonder if there's a connection between the Mandan Indians and the Mandaean followers of John the Baptist. And so I started hitting the books and came to the work of a Mayan scholar named Graham Kersley, who wrote a telephone book of a book called Maya Genesis, or Mayan Genesis, South Asian Myths, Migrations, and Iconography in Mesoamerica. And he claims that he's got solid evidence that the Mandaeans and the Mandan Indians of Nashville in North America are the same group of people. What are your thoughts on a proposal such as that?
Well, it's perfectly possible. I mean, we know that the sailors and adventurers of 2,000 years or so ago were circling the globe, and there's certainly plenty of evidence of it. This woman that I interviewed, this Mandaean woman, she said, yeah, she looked like that she and others Mandaeans looked like Indians, but that's both East and West Indians. So she, in a sense, she's saying that she looked like, you know, probably the Mandaean Indians looked like. So I think it's entirely possible. It's something that I would have to do a little bit more research, especially to see what their rites were. For the Mandaeans, the most important rite was that of the water baptism, and but the way they did it and their understanding of it was completely different than the way it's done within the Christian Church today. In fact, they say that the rite was completely distorted by the Christian Church, and you never, for example, do it in stagnant water. The water has to be flowing, and also when you do it, there should be a Mandaean priest. The Mandaean priest is there to kind of help activate a subtle energy within the water, which they refer to as the Holy Spirit, with a transformative essence that when you go through the baptism, you're surrounded by that essence, and it's that essence that really does the work of transforming you and cleansing you on all different levels. So it's not just a simple physical water a cleansing. It's the cleansing of your spirit, a cleansing on all different levels. And this is the rite and the way that John the Baptist performed it in the River Jordan. And it's believed that a lot of people that went through his baptism received the Holy Spirit and our kundalini awakening through that baptism. And so anyway, as I was saying, John the Baptist was the pure form of a Gnostic master. He lived without books, without texts, without anything, and he totally depended on his own inner wisdom for guidance, for knowledge. That's the true Gnostic. A Gnostic is one that does not depend on an intermediary, a priest, or a book. They go right inside themselves and get their guidance from spirit within their own hearts. And we believe that Jesus was a true Gnostic. It's known that Jesus did travel all over the Far East, and Jesus also traveled down into India. Into Egypt, rather. One of the favorite books of the Gnostic Templars was the Leviticon, and this was passed down within different Gnostic Templar sects. And in the Leviticon, it talks about Jesus going down and receiving the initiation into the priesthood of Osiris in Egypt in the Great Pyramid, and then bringing back all the wisdom and knowledge and power that he gained through that initiation and handing it all over to John the Apostle. And it's books like that and other books that seem to imply that John the Apostle was the true successor of Jesus's Gnostic wisdom and Gnostic power. And so there was essentially two churches, a Gnostic church that passed on the wisdom and the power, and a more secular church founded by St. Peter, which is the Catholic Church today.
This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're talking with Mark Pinkham. Mark, a moment ago you were talking about Jesus and his initiation in the temples of Egypt, particularly those of Osiris. One of the key points you make in the book concerns the belief that John the Baptist embodied the energy, if you will, of the Sumerian god Enki and other green men. And, of course, another green man is Osiris. And one notable connection between Osiris and John is that both lost their head. And in the case of Osiris, his head was not a human cranium. It was a device, what appears to be a pillar or an antenna that was attached to a platform, as exemplified at the Temple of Abydos. And I know that many Templars believe in John's head as an actual human cranium, but could it actually be something else? And in particular, couldn't it be the pillar of Osiris?
Well, I think that until we find that head, William, everything is conjecture at this point. However, those who I've interviewed about it, those higher up in the Templar organization, and also Freemasons, and those high up in the Johannite Church today, believe that the head really was the head of John the Baptist.
And what good would it be to possess the head of John the Baptist, the cranium of John the Baptist, a decapitated skull?
Because the idea is that John the Baptist, well, you can read in Scripture, when he was born, he was full of the Holy Spirit. He was full of this kundalini energy. He was a true kundalini master. He was a true grand master of this Holy Grail lineage that I'm talking about. And so throughout his life, that energy was continually emanating from all of his pores, from his whole entire being. And it's believed in the East, when a great master like John the Baptist dies, you never cremate them. You entomb them, because their bodies are continually giving out that energy, that kundalini energy, and people can benefit by it. And so it's believed that John the Baptist's head continued to emanate that energy, even thousands of years later, when it was found in Constantinople during the Fourth Crusade. There's a legend that head had actually helped to heal one of the Holy Roman emperors previous to when the Templars found it. And then later, during their depositions, the Templars were known to say that head could make leaves grow, leaves bud, flowers blossom. It could turn winter into spring. It still had that power. And so that's our belief, is that when the head was found, it was taken back into Europe and placed on the high altars of the Templars, and then only was only present during the highest initiations, because we find out that it was only really the high chiefs that even knew of its existence, and it was actually in the possession of Hugh Perrod, his name was. He was one of the high chiefs, and this came out during the depositions, but of course the Inquisition was never able to find it, which is why we believe it's still floating around someplace. And when I did interview the primate of the Johannite tradition, which is descended from this Johannite lineage that the Templars were part of, he seems to think that he knows where the head is, and that it will it will show itself, it will be found, it will come back into public consciousness within the next few years. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, very interesting. Personally, I don't think it's an actual cranium. I think it's a symbol for a skill. The skull is a symbol for a school or a skill or a body of wisdom that anyone can learn. And that takes us to my next question. I'm wondering, where do we find today the Templar Kundalini teachings, and where would an individual go to learn to do this? Couldn't any individual achieve a state similar to that of John the Baptist?
Well, that's the contention, certainly, that we all have that potential to achieve the Gnostic consciousness that John the Baptist had achieved. What are the rites? Well, that's something that we are doing a lot of research to uncover. But we do believe that a lot of the rites that they were found to be heretical and burned at the stake for were Gnostic rites and rites that were geared towards activation of kundalini energies. There was
let's pour some gas on this fire. I'm sorry.
Sorry?
I said let's pour some gas on this fire because you note that the Templars used hashish and cannabis in their sacrament. How did they use it and why? And would this still be formed? Would this be part of the reformation of the Templar sacrament?
Absolutely. Well, anybody in the Middle East at the time of the Templars or since that time would have been exposed to hashish. It's the same today. It's all over the Middle East. And we know that there was some interaction between the Templars and the Assassins. And the name Assassin comes from hashish. And the Assassins were a Sufi sect founded by Hassan Saba, who studied at the Sufi School of Wisdom down in Cairo. And that was a common practice of the Sufis, the Assassins, to smoke hashish. And, you know, the Assassins and the Sufis referred to hashish as the flesh of Al-Qadir, which is interesting because Al-Qadir is the green man. And Al-Qadir is actually another name for the St. George, the knight St. George, who became a patron of the Templar order. So it's very possible that the Templars could have made contact or communed with St. George on hashish. Certainly when they went back into Europe and went up to Scotland, it appears as though they continued their hashish rites because you can find cannabis fields or hemp fields still up in northern Scotland and Caithness and even around Rosslyn Chapel. So
yeah, it really makes me wonder, you know, over the years, I'm sure you've had a similar experience. I've had several, better than a half a dozen people get in contact with me, certain that they are the reincarnated Jesus Christ. And at first, I didn't quite know how to handle that. And then as each successive person turned up, I started learning the questions to ask. And of course, there's always a Templar connection, a very deep interest in the Templars. And then finally, I started asking them, do you smoke marijuana? Next thing you know, the answer is not just yes, but in fact, they smoke a lot of it. And what I began to wonder, Mark, and this is my question, do you think it's possible that the serpent of wisdom is in the grass, is the snake in the grass, and that this is somehow triggering something within our receptor sites that lead people to believe that they're one of these ascended type beings? And do you think that the Templars also were experiencing something along those lines as well, and this may have ultimately led to their persecution?
So I think what you're implying is that there was a certain amount of, led him into a certain amount of delusion? Is that what?
Not necessarily delusion, but let's just say you refer to Kundalini as an energy and John and Al-Qadir and others as archetypal energies. Did it help them tap into or plug into this consciousness that seems to pervade the planetary consciousness, and within it is this notion of one being one of these ascended beings, or in fact putting them on the path towards achieving that ascension?
I think that what it possibly could have plugged them into is, well, if you study the assassin rites, an assassin candidate for initiation would consume the hashish, and then he would find himself in this paradisical sort of environment for a number of hours, which is interesting because the hashish is known as the flesh of Al-Qadir. Al-Qadir is a name for the green man, and the green man is commonly associated with the Garden of Eden, is associated with paradise. Now, this green man is also, what we're finding, is also known as the king of the world in the Far East. He's also the original Kundalini master. He's also the original initiator. And so it could have actually got the Templars in touch with a very ancient kundalini tradition.
This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're talking with Mark Pinkham. Mark, I'd like to ask on this line here about tapping into this kundalini consciousness, how did the Templars pray, and do you use their method of prayer, or how do you work at the craft?
Well, actually, what we're trying to do in our Gnostic order is not just to revive the rites of the Templars. We're actually going back to what we believe to be the beginning of their Gnostic rites, which actually goes back to the beginning of the Holy Grail lineage that they were initiated into. And this is why we're actually also studying the rites of this original Kundalini master that founded the lineage, who's also known as the King of the World, the Green Man, as I just mentioned. His temples today are on Sri Lanka, which for about a third of the world is today known as the Garden of Eden. So this being is still in the Garden of Eden. And he's known in India as the original Kundalini master and the first teacher of the path to enlightenment. And so we are closely studying his rites, his teachings, his practices that he taught, so that we have the purest form of Gnosticism that we can possibly share to people in the order.
Now, another enormously important subject that you touch on is the influence of cosmic rays coming from the Big Dipper. I've actually got a lecture coming up in Tempe, Arizona called The Anointing of the Dove, and the Dove is another name for that constellation. And this talk I'm going to give is about the energy streaming from this constellation and Mary Magdalene's connection to them, and I hope to be back to report on this to Whitley in December. It seems that there's no question that the collision of galaxies M81 and M82, both located in the Big Dipper, were recorded by the ancients and that they tapped the energies from this event. Talk about what you've learned about the Big Dipper.
Well, it appears as though if you go back far enough in history that the planet was ruled over by lineages of priest kings, and these are certainly known in the Grail legends as the original Fisher Kings. The Fisher Kings were essentially human holy grails in that they held within them a very sacred power, which we've referred to as the Holy Spirit and Kundalini in this interview. These Fisher Kings, or these priest kings of ancient times, as long as they lived in alignment with the higher will, they were able to build up their inner power, and they were able to actually nurture their entire kingdoms with it. But as soon as they fell from that alignment, then their power would slowly but surely drain away. Now, a lot of these Fisher Kings, especially if you look in China, you had a lineage of dragon kings who were full of this power, and many of them claim to have come from the Big Dipper, and they even, when they were born, they even had the 7 stars of the Big Dipper just right into their skin as big birthmarks. And Sri Yuan-Ti, the greatest of all the emperors that ever existed in China, he was born when a ray of intense light streamed out of the Big Dipper and entered the womb of his mother. And so there is this tradition that the kings come out of the Big Dipper. And also, if you look in the east, or the west rather, you look in Mexico, in the Maya tradition, the kings, priest kings there were associated with the jaguar. Well, to them, the jaguar was the Big Dipper. In other civilizations, it's associated with the bear, and the bear, and so the priest kings are associated with the bear. And you look in the Hopi tradition here in Arizona, the bear clan are the rulers of this fourth world. So there's a special association between rulership, the priest kings, the Fisher Kings of ancient times, and the Big Dipper. There's no question.
Yeah, and it points to some vastly profound knowledge that the Templars must have possessed if they are of the lineage of these Fisher Kings. then it suggests that they too might have understood something about, well, a very ancient collision that took place millions of years ago, and the possibility that not just cosmic rays, high-energy cosmic rays, are somehow coming into the Milky Way galaxy from this constellation, but also souls, and that these souls then embodied as these various leaders throughout history. Do you have anything else you want to add to this conjecture?
Oh, well, I think that's entirely possible. And I think that there could be something to them having been descended from the Merovingian lineage and so forth and so on. Merovingians were the people of the bear. They were descended from the Arcadians, who were also people of the bear, the Donans that were associated with the great bear. Certainly there is that association, but I think what you find if you trace back the Holy Grail lineage that they were initiated into, you'll find that the founder of the lineage was not necessarily from the great bear. According to the traditions of the Theosophists, who spent many years studying this being, this first kundalini master, they found that he actually came from Venus, and he brought with him the knowledge of kundalini and yoga and all kinds of alchemical practice through which the kundalini could be activated. And also, see, the Templars became very much involved with yoga, Gnosticism, alchemy, and so they were, especially that they would focus on those traditions that they received that were associated with these things. The Venusian lineage, through the Venusian lineage, they received a lot of wisdom regarding Gnosticism and alchemy and kundalini, but also through the Syrian lineage. And
I was just going to say that, Mark, yeah. Go ahead.
And this is why you find in free Masonic lodges today that you've got the blazing star among their main altar, which is Sirius. So there's a special association between Templars, Freemasons, and Sirius, and you also find that connection noted in the Theosophy, where Alice Bailey and some of these great psychics, they actually received information that the first three levels of Freemasonry actually came from Sirius. And you also find that the native indigenous wisdom keepers of Egypt, like the one that Stephen Mailer studies with Hakim, they say that the ancient name of Sirius was Sapata. Sapata was the master craftsman. And so there's got to be some connection there. And, of course, you study the Dogons, and there's no question that the Syrians were here as missionaries at some point.
Yeah, really interesting connection I've been working on, too, is that Sirius is also called the Tyr of Isis. Now, the word Tyr is spelled T-E-A-R, which could be pronounced either Tyr or Ter. Now, if it's Ter, that's very interesting, because when you look up the word Ter in Egyptian hieroglyphic dictionaries, its hieroglyph is what today is the shape that we use to describe a stargate or a wormhole. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of following up this possibility that, hey, we had this collision in the Big Dipper millions of years ago, and perhaps this race of beings, as wild as it sounds, came first either through Sirius or through the Ter or stargate of Isis at Sirius or Venus. So very interesting stuff, and I look forward to following up with you more on that. But for right now, Mark, I can't let you go without asking you about Saladin. And the reason I wanted to talk about Saladin is because, as you document, he was the arch enemy of the Templars, a hero of Islam who attempted to unite the Arab forces and recapture Jerusalem. Did you know that in addition to Nebuchadnezzar, Saddam Hussein considers himself the successor to Saladin?
That who does? I'm sorry.
Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein. The successor to Saladin.
In fact, in 1987, a Baghdad publisher produced a children's book titled The Hero Saladin, and the cover showed a picture of Saddam with a sword-wielding horseman in the background, and after a brief account of Saladin's life, emphasizing once again his reconquest of Jerusalem, the taking back of it from the Templars, the rest of the booklet was devoted to Saddam Hussein, who was called the noble and heroic Arab fighter Saladin II, Saddam Hussein. Now, the reason I wanted you to comment on that is because we're talking today about a revival of the Templar order. does it make sense that for every action there's an equal but opposite reaction? Does it therefore make sense that the arch enemies of the Templars would also be reviving today? And have you seen any evidence of that, or what are your comments or thoughts on that?
Well, you mean since we are returning as Templars, that also those that we were in conflict with in the past are also returning, and so we're kind of resuming that conflict?
That's what I'm wondering.
Well, that's entirely possible. I think that those kind of things also kind of have to stay within the realm of conjecture until we have more tangible evidence of it. But
well, we know that Saddam Hussein was in search of the secrets of the ancient Green Man, of Enki, of the Babylonians, of all of these secrets you've been describing. He was, without a doubt, searching for them. And I wonder, was he searching for them in the context that he is back to battle the Templars again? And if the Templars are trying to unite East and West, is contemporary politics reflective then of this age-old conflict that manifested in the 13th century and 14th century? And now here it is again.
All I can say for sure, William, is our order, our Gnostic Templar order, is not about physical battles. It's about developing the Gnostic, the spiritual warrior. All their weapons are inner weapons. They're the weapons of wisdom, and that's how we intend to fight our battles. And so if there's going to be any continued conflict from the past that we're going to involve ourselves in, it's going to be using our inner wisdom, our inner tools, our inner weapons, and not anything outer.
This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're talking with Mark Pinkham. Mark, just before the break, we were talking about the revival of the Templars and their quest or desire to reignite, if you will, our inner powers. And in the book, you note extensively that the Templars were devotees of the goddess, and you note even that Wolfram called the Knights Templar the Knights of the Dove, a symbol often connected with Mary Magdalene. Let's talk for a moment about the Templar affiliation with the goddess.
Okay, great. Yeah. Certainly the affiliation with the goddess came through the Sufis, who you'll find were great goddess worshippers themselves, but also through this Holy Grail lineage that was way back when founded by the ancient son of the goddess. He's the Green Man, the original Green Man that was worshipped in many different traditions as the Lord of Nature, who was born in the spring from his mother and died in the fall. So obviously there's a special connection there. But the Templars, we believe, certainly a certain good portion of them became Gnostics, in that they wanted to have the direct experience within themselves. They went inside themselves to have this experience, just like John the Baptist did. Well, that kind of experience you find in the goddess tradition. This is the kind of experience that for thousands of years has been espoused and promoted in the goddess tradition. Sometimes you'll find that they might use sacraments to open themselves up to that wisdom, or they'll go out and they'll do vision quests, or they will do long periods of meditation to open that up. But the awakening of intuition and opening of the heart, that's always a part of the goddess tradition. The God tradition, by contrast, is the activation and the development of the intellect and the separation and categorization of things. Whereas the goddess brings things together as love and opens up your intuition so that you can access that wisdom within yourself. And I just wanted to mention that when the Templars went back into Europe, we know that they were very much involved with building or training the Masons that built these great Gothic cathedrals. And we believe that a lot of them were dedicated to Mary Magdalene originally, and we certainly believe that the Black Madonna was a very important symbol of the Templars, because it represented the transformative energy of the goddess. And in many of these Gothic cathedrals, they used to have big Black Madonnas. And at one point, there was a pilgrimage route that the Templars took that started in Santiago de Compostela in Spain, and then it went up 7 different cathedrals, 7 different Gothic cathedrals, all the way up Europe into Scotland, and ended at Rosslyn Chapel. And throughout this pilgrimage, what the Templars were doing, at each stop, they were working to expand and open up their Gnosticism that much more. In each one of these Gothic cathedrals were Black Madonnas, and many of them you'll find today are somehow associated with the labyrinth. Certainly Chartres is one of those. It still has the labyrinth on its floor. Even Rosslyn Chapel. Rosslyn Chapel, if you go in today, there's no labyrinth on the floor, but that's a new floor. That floor was put in a couple hundred years ago. That's not the original floor. The original floor, they believe, had a big labyrinth on it. Labyrinth is the form body of the goddess, and so a lot of their rites, the Templars' rites, were using symbols of the goddess and walking the labyrinth to connect up with that goddess energy, which ultimately will go to awaken Gnosticism and also activate kundalini. They're one and the same. The Gnostic path is about awakening kundalini. Because you cannot totally establish yourself in Gnostic awareness until you have alchemically transformed so that you can hold that high frequency of consciousness within the physical body. So they go one and the same. This is why in the Gnostic lineage of the Holy Grail lineage, when you passed on the power from one Grand Master to the other, you didn't just pass on the power, you passed on the wisdom, the Gnostic wisdom, because they were one and the same. When you get initiated with that power, it works to open you up, activate your chakras, transform you so that you open up to that Gnostic wisdom that exists within your heart, and it happens to everybody. So that's an important thing to understand, is they're one and the same. The power, the alchemy, the Gnosticism, they all are interconnected, and you can't really practice one without practicing the other. And this is why we believe that certainly the Templars practice both. They practice both Gnosticism and alchemy.
Yeah, on the subject of Templars and Rosslyn, you note that the Sinclair family is excited about the possibility of the secret Templar artifacts hidden in the crypt underneath Rosslyn Chapel, and that they soon be revealed. What do you anticipate is the nature of these relics?
Well, one for sure is the big Black Madonna that used to sit in the main altar in Rosslyn Chapel originally. That's one thing. Besides that, there could be, virtually many things. We know that there's 20 Sinclairs in full knighted armor down there. We know that there are many boxes, many cases. Ground scans have shown this. There's actually 8 big vaults down there. All right.
Wow.
And there's one legend that right after the Templars were formed, they started digging around the ruins of Solomon's temple, and after 9 years of digging, they left Palestine, and they left with 5 boxes or 5 crates, and these crates eventually ended up in Rosslyn Castle. Then there was a fire in Rosslyn Castle, and at that time the boxes were taken out for safekeeping, but right after that, Rosslyn Chapel was built. And so it is believed that one reason Rosslyn Chapel was built was to hold these 5 cases. Now, these 5 cases could have been full of the treasures of the Jews, as well as a lot of documents and scrolls that, for one, could be confirming this Holy Grail lineage that they were initiated into. They could be genealogical records related to Jesus and Mary, something about their marriage. Certainly a lot of Essene documents are potentially in there. So we know that those cases are down there. That's another thing. There's the Scottish Holy Rood, which is part of the original cross that Jesus was crucified on. That's bedecked over with jewels and gold, and that was lost along the way. And it's believed that that's down there, as well as some of the crown jewels even of Scotland are down there. So there's potentially amazing things that could be down there. People have guessed that anything from the Cup of Christ to the Ark of the Covenant is down there. So we essentially don't really know for sure, and won't until we open it up.
And so now, Mark, you're working, I guess, very hard on the International Order of the Gnostic Templars. Talk to me about building a new Templar organization. What's the goal of your organization, and what's happening?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, William, because what's important for us right now is that we're going to have our first U.S. initiation into the order December 2nd to 4th, and we're going to try to get our international Grand Prior, Ian Sinclair, to come over for that event. And so right now we are opening our doors to whoever is really interested to joining up with us. Those that are interested would get initiated into the first level of Squire and Lady in Waiting, and then progress up to Lady and Knight Templar. Fisher King and Queen is the next level, and at that point they can have their own preceptories, their own centers, and teach the wisdom within the order. But together, all of us in the order want to work to complete the goals of the Templars, which is to unite East and West forms of spirituality, because we feel like we're right on the threshold of a new planetary spirituality that will be the union of those two. And so we're going to work very hard and research this Holy Grail lineage to see if we can get more legitimate evidence that the world will accept. We also plan to take expeditions. One expedition is into Shambhala, as an example. We believe that the legend of Christ and Satan is based on a much more ancient legend from the Far East, from Shambhala, about the king of the world that was totally distorted when it came west. And if we can find that legend, and we can show proof of that legend, we have the potential of actually making a huge difference in the consciousness of this planet. So this is what we're working towards. We're also consider ourselves not the knights necessarily of Solomon's temple, but the knights of all temples. And we guard all temples, and one of our goals is to reactivate many of the temples that aren't used today, even the megalithic temples such as Machu Picchu and even the Great Pyramid ultimately. So we have a lot of big goals on the table, and certainly one of the primary things we are is a research organization, and our order, Ian Sinclair, our Grand Prior, just inherited 1,000 volumes of Templar books from a man in France who just passed away, and right now we're building a whole new library up there in Gnostic, and so it's eventually we're going to have the biggest research center in the whole world up in northern Scotland.
Oh, fantastic!
So there's a lot of things happening.
In your meeting on December 2nd, now that's in Sedona, though, right?
This is in Sedona, right? And anybody that's interested can go to our website, www.gnostictemplars.org, and follow the prompts. You can actually download an application and fill it out and send it in if that's something you're interested in. But you need to do it right away because we're in the planning stages and things are happening very quickly right now. So, but anybody that wants to align with our order, its aims and its goals, and play what we consider to be a very important role in the transformation of consciousness on the planet today, we welcome you to apply and become a member of our order.
That's great. Mark, on the subject of Shambhala, just while you're talking, I was reminded of an anecdotal story that was recorded by Doris Kearns Godwin in her book, No Ordinary Time. It's about FDR. After James Doolittle had successfully raided Tokyo, the world press cornered FDR, and they were astounded. They said, how is it possible you were able to get those planes into Tokyo? I mean, the Japanese had said that Tokyo would never be invaded, and it wasn't even never invaded by the Chinese. FDR gets a big smile on his face, and he says, oh, those planes came from our secret base in Shambhala. What's your take on a statement such as that?
FDR said this?
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
this is coming on the heels of course, FDR's and Nicholas Roerch's quest for the Grail in Shambhala. Yeah.
Right, and Henry Wallace, who was the Secretary of Agriculture, got him involved with that because Henry was actually a student of Nicholas Roerch. So it could have been kind of a in-jest remark, or there could have been more something substantial to it, whether there really are bases there or not. That's something I would have to do more research on to really.
Well, you'll have to tell us when you get back from Shambhala what it's all about there. So
I definitely will.
It's been a real pleasure talking with you today. I appreciate the conversation very much, and I look forward to talking with you again.
Thank you very much for having me on the show, William, and it was indeed a pleasure reconnecting with you.
All right.